All right, this is a presentation on LGBT, queer, trans theory, and issues. Readings coming up on LGBT studies, queer studies and queer theory, transgender studies, and the like. So one of the first things to understand is that much like when we talk about feminism, all of these issues are a transgender woman who is currently starring on the Netflix series Black. Lovely lady I had lunch with many years ago at one. Nice topic this week. Okay, so like I said, it's a combination of political and intellectual movements. The political movement, most commonly referred to as gay rights, can go by a long acronym of initials, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, and allies. It is, much like feminism, a political movement for social and economic equality for people who fall under these categories or terms or identities to have the same social and economic rights as everyone else. And we got a picture right there of the state capitol down in Columbia at SC Pride in 2010. Okay, first concept, homosexuals. They were illegal in some states up until 2003. The first state they were illegal in all states as late as 1969, and they were classified as mentally ill until 1973. The idea of homosexuals as a type of person comes about in the 19th century. This is by Michel Foucault, where previous to that, people always have had same-sex relationships, intimate relationships, all kinds of activities, but it isn't until the 19th century that people who do that those actions become understood as a separate type of person, as a category. So we've been talking throughout this course about the creation and the maintenance of categories. This is another place where we see categories being created. In the past, there were just a variety of sexual acts that people did. In the 19th century, these start getting defined as not only heterosexual and homosexual acts, but heterosexual and homosexual persons, as well as many other categories. And one of the results of this is that when you categorize someone and identify them as a certain type of person, you can then arrest them, jail them, discriminate against them, write laws about them, deny them housing or medical care, because it's not just an act that someone does, it becomes a type of person. And you can see there arrests of public figures for attending a benefit in San Francisco on religion and the homosexual in 1965, getting rounded up by the cops, and below homosexual men in the Nazi camps during World War II. Now, one of the areas where this starts to change is with sexology. Of sexuality as two categories, again, another binary or dualism, but a scale from 1 to 6. And you could fall anywhere on that scale from exclusively heterosexual to exclusively homosexual, almost entirely hetero with a little bit of homo, a lot of homo, a little hetero, 50-50. He looked at how people fell on a continuum, not into two mutually exclusive categories. And he found at the time that 37% of adult men had had at least one homosexual experience, and 10% had been exclusively homosexual for at least 3 years between the ages of 16 and 55. And this is where you get the figure that 10% of the population is gay. To this day, there's a lot of debate around that, but what's important to know is that even in Kinsey's original research, he's not talking about people makes people realize that there's a lot more people out there that are not exclusively heterosexual than they ever thought. And this leads to the creation of gay and lesbian rights movements. There were early versions in the US and in Europe. One of the first big organizations in the United States is the Mattachine Society in 1950. And then in 1969 is the beginning of the modern lesbian and gay rights movements, when a bunch of patrons at the Stonewall Bar in New York refused to be arrested by police when the police came in to raid the bar. And they fought back, and they rioted for several days, and this is considered the beginning of the modern LGBT rights movement, of refusing to be oppressed and harassed and repressed. Today you have organizations like the Human Rights Campaign Fund, Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, and various others. Gay pride, a phrase that gets used a lot to describe parades and activities, and where this sort of comes from is resisting the early ideas that people who were gay were either mentally ill or sick or criminals, and they're saying, well, we're not, and we're not ashamed. It's also an effort at public visibility. It's also an effort to say, look, we're here, we're your friends, we're your neighbors, we're your teachers, we're your students. It has evolved over the years from more political protest marches to big family celebrations, and it also has turned out to be very profitable for local economies. You can sort of see the development of this in South Carolina. Upstate Pride, which happens in Spartanburg every summer or fall, I think is going on its 5th year now, but they've been having South Carolina Pride down in Columbia for about 23 or 24 years. So you can sort of feel the difference as Pride develops between these two nations. So that's the political movement. Gay and lesbian studies is an effort to document the lives of gay and lesbian people, to recover their forgotten history, to study what it is like to be gay and lesbian, what has happened to them, what they can tell us about history and society. It originally begins outside of the Academy by independent scholars because it's not considered an appropriate topic for people to do research on. So the initial people that did some of the founding work in lesbian and gay studies were actually not professors and academics, because they would have gotten in trouble for doing it. It then gradually moves into the academy and becomes, to this day, an established part of scholarly research. One thing that you can't really talk about the modern LGBT rights movement is without addressing AIDS. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome caused by the HIV virus. It's first discovered and reported in 1981. There was not a test to identify it until 1985. It was also not until 1985 that the United States president first even mentioned or acknowledged that AIDS existed. And by the next year, 16,000 people had died in the United States. There was not a drug to treat it until 1987, and the president did not mention it in a major speech until 1987. So this is why you have groups like ACT UP and other political groups founded to draw attention to this issue, because the feeling was that the government, media, and society did not care about this disease because it mostly in the United States is so they felt like people just wanted to die, and began a political and social movement to challenge this. You can see a little bit of this in the movie Dallas Buyers Club, although that's just focused on straight men. Or currently you can see this story in the production of Angels in America, which is going on in Greenville right now, or the forthcoming HBO movie The Normal Heart. So queer politics follows AIDS politics, and this is to work for gay and lesbian rights beyond just AIDS and HIV. It's looking for visibility, for positive media representation, for being able to be seen in public. Politics led to something called queer theory and queer studies. And queer theory and queer studies are academic fields that look at the creation of difference. So if queer politics were about saying our differences are normal and abnormal, right? Abnormal is the opposite of normal. Normal is the opposite of abnormal. They define each other, and queer theory and queer studies look at this. Another theory you'll run across in your readings are references to the public sphere. Public sphere is a theory by Jürgen Habermas, and it's kind of the core of democratic theory. It's the idea that to have social change, to be a good democracy, we have to be visible, we have to be seen, we have to have conversations, all of us as democratic citizens, about the issues of our time. And that's so that we can make up our minds about these issues and tell our elected representatives what we want done about them, and then have those representatives act and create laws that reflect our interests. But we can't do this if we don't have a public space to talk about it. And that's called the public sphere. A lot of times people say the public sphere takes place in the media or online. But it also takes place when you just sit around and talk about politics and issues with people. There are theories of counterpublics, which are small publics opposite to the main public sphere, or boundary publics, which exist on the periphery of it. But it brings up issues of sharing public space, sharing media, visibility, being seen and heard. And people a lot of times do public activities in order to draw attention to this. If the media is not talking about the issues you care about, you have to get their attention. There's people in the media and the country that know about the issues and decide what to do about this. So obviously here we're going to take this from AIDS activism, LGBT activism. I mean, you can apply the same concept just in the Tea Party, right? Issues that they felt the media and the government were not talking about, and so they raised a ruckus to get attention, to get those issues on the agenda. That's why a lot of queer activism and LGBT activism takes place in the media, trying to challenge negative representations, trying to support positive representations, as well as producing their own queer media like zines and movies and records and things like that. The media is where we as a society communicate our ideas about gender and sexuality, biological sex and identity, and so the media is a really important place, and that's why you see people complaining and arguing and challenging the media on the way they represent things. That's why you see people creating their own media, because the media is an important place of society for us to have a public sphere to discuss issues. So you've got two readings coming up, a chapter from Mary Gray's book on youth, media, and queer visibility in rural America. Mary Gray brought her in as a guest speaker just a few months ago at Clemson, and we had a really great time with her. This is her book where she did an ethnography of queer kids in Kentucky and observed how they used media and also just what it is like to be a gay or lesbian or queer young person in a rural area. And that's kind of even though she uses the word queer, it's really a good example of LGBT studies. She's looking at the lives and the activities of the queer experiences of gay and lesbian people. You will then have a reading by Matilda about an organization called Gay Shame, and that's a cover of one of Matilda's books there on the right. And Matilda is more of an example of a queer writer, queer theorist, queer activist. It's more angry, it's more in your face. It's also funnier sometimes. It's more outrageous. It's a strategy of not playing nice. It's a strategy of sort of challenging the status quo and challenging the norm. And so you're going to read a history of a queer organization. Matilda writes about gay shame as opposed to gay pride, and that's an intentional, provocative, challenging sort of thing to do. Okay, so implications of all of this.
Man up! Man up! Man up!
Okay, so that's a brief clip from the 2010 elections when man up was used as an insult towards Harry Reid, right? It shows how gender failure, not performing your gender correctly, can be used as an insult, right? Man up or be a man is basically the same thing as don't be a fag or don't be a sissy. It's using the homosexuality as a threat. It's using gender failure as a threat. If you don't act this way, it means that you are gay or a sissy or somehow failed in your gender performance. But remember that these sort of gender and sexuality-based insults are a part of all bullying, all attacks. Any man can be a sissy. So these issues of studying LGBT people and queer theory have implications and implications beyond just queer people, lesbian and gay people, right? Because anyone can be insulted in terms of their gender performance. And I'd throw out as a question, maybe some for your discussion board post, what would be the equivalent for femininity? What are the insults of not properly performing your feminine gender for being called a gender failure? Okay, now obviously we're quite aware today of gender bullying because bullying has become a really topic in the media. This started about 4 years ago when there was a rash of young people committing suicide in a period of just a few months in 2010. And all these people you see here and more committed suicide often because of being bullied for having inappropriate sexual or gender performances. And this really put the issue on the national radar and has led to sort of the anti-bullying movement that we have today 4 years later. Just in 2011, the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network did a state-by-state study of middle and high schools across the United States, and here you have the results. So, gray is verbal harassment, blue is physical harassment, and the dark blue is as if they were, and 52% were physically harassed, 74% verbally harassed about their gender expression, 54% verbally harassed about their gender, and then you can see down below religion, race, ethnicity, and disability. So it's an ongoing issue around the world and here at home in South Carolina. Now, like I said, in response to this, we've had a big anti-bullying movement come about. We have things here at Clemson like the President's LGBTQ Task Force that President Barker started which is looking into how to make Clemson a safer and more welcoming space for LGBTQ students and the entire Clemson family. You may also hear about the National Day where people wear purple to support LGBTQ teens. In the right-hand corner there, you can see a very sad response to that by a middle school vice president in Arkansas who said some really nasty things in response to the day of wearing purple. So one thing to notice about these movements is it's often one step forward and 2 steps backward, or 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. That whenever you sort of have advances made, we saw this in feminism, we see it now with LGBT, we see it with bullying, there's usually a backlash, there's usually a reaction against it. And you can see Clint McCants there saying some really nasty things. Seriously, they want me to wear purple because 5 queers committed suicide. The only way I'm wearing it is for them is if they all commit suicide. And that's the school district vice president. So it makes you wonder, what's so threatening? Why the hate? Why the anger? Why the bullying? Even if you believe that something is morally wrong, and there's certainly debates and disagreements about these issues, there are lots of other morally wrong things that don't get the same kind of negative attention. We don't see bullying and hate speech about lying or stealing or coveting or insulting religious beliefs or adultery. Why is homosexual, bisexual, queer, trans, why are people and activities around that, do they arouse so much fear and anger? It's sort of one of the questions of our society that we're still trying to figure out. Okay, we're going to wrap up with a vocabulary lesson. All right, I know this gets confusing, so you might want to pause this to take notes. Okay, a female impersonator or a gender illusionist is a performer on stage who is trying to convincingly appear as the opposite sex or gender on stage only. These are like the performers in Las Vegas that pretend to be Cher or Celine Dion or Rihanna. It's a job. They don't want to be women. They're not necessarily always gay. They don't look this way on the street. It's just something they do in a show for a living. Drag queens and drag kings may also be the same thing, but they are also performers who are not necessarily trying to fool you. A female impersonator is trying to fool you. They want you to believe they really are a woman. Drag is more of a comedic performance that acknowledges the cross-dressing. It's a wink and a nod. It's a humorous mix of saying, oh my gosh, I'm a woman dressed up like a man, I'm a man dressed up as a woman, isn't that funny? So drag queens acknowledge the joke, female impersonators don't really get the joke. Trans refers to a variety of things. A transvestite or a crossdresser is a heterosexual man who gets pleasure from wearing women's clothes in daily life. This can be sexual, it can also just be, wearing a nice little pink sweater around the house. Pink women's sweater, Angora sweater. I'm looking at the poster for Ed Wood here, the Johnny Depp movie. Most crossdressers and transvestites are heterosexual. A transsexual is someone who changes their biological sex in real life, typically through surgery. So this is, sexual reassignment surgery. Transgender is changing the mannerisms and the dress to those of the opposite sex or gender. Many people who are transgender, who perform or present a different gender identity than they were assigned at birth, are not transsexual. They don't all get surgery. Many people choose to live their life completely happy, appearing to be the gender that they feel they should have been at birth and don't necessarily have to go through with surgery. And it's important to remember that sex, gender, and sexual orientation may not all transition in unison. So it is not unheard of for a lesbian woman to transition into being a biological man or a transgender man, but then as a transgender man, be gay and be attracted to other men. So when she was a woman, she was attracted to other women, but when she became a transgender man, she was attracted to other men. Basically, every possible combination you can think of mixing up sex, gender, and sexual orientation exists. It's important to understand that they don't transition all together in the same way in every case. I cannot pronounce these, I'm sorry, my apologies. Hijira, Kuthra, Koja are South Asian physiological men, but who adopt feminine characteristics. Third gender or third sex is the idea of being both genders or neither, that there's something out there besides male or female that is a third gender or a third sex, and some people identify that way. We've already talked about intersex, which is having ambiguous or multiple genitals. Like I just said, transitioning is when you are in the process of changing your sex and or gender. A trans man or a trans woman is someone for whom the period of transition is now over. They've completed the transition. Two-spirit or Bardash is a traditional role in over 130 Native American and Canadian First Nation tribes in which masculine and feminine characteristics are combined in one person, and Bardashes are often spiritual leaders in their tribe. There are also people who consider themselves queer heterosexuals. And this means they're straight, they are romantically and physically attracted to the opposite sex, but they think that there is some queer aspect, some non-normal aspect to their lives, their relationships, or the way they think about sex and gender. Genderqueer or intergender are people who feel like they have aspects of both or neither. Androgynous is when you have aspects of both genders in one. Unisex is the idea that you don't have any gendered characteristics, that you're neutral. And that sort of raises the question of, is that even possible? Is it possible to completely erase gender? Pansexual are people whose sexual attraction is independent of sex and gender. These are people who say, I just fall in love and am attracted to different kinds of people, and it doesn't matter to me whether they're men or women or masculine or feminine. Polyamory, polygamy, polyfidelity, these are different ways that people can love more than one person at once. Independent of each other. There's a variety of different ways out there that people have romantic and sexual relationships with more than just one other person. And that's not really the focus, but one thing that does bring up that I want y'all to think about as I end this is in most of the history of discussing and talking about gender and sexuality, particularly stuff we're looking at this week, the focus is on sexual intercourse, right? It's focused on what people do physically. What's missing from most of these discussions in reading is the reason you have sexual intercourse is love. is romance, is affection. And one of the things that I would argue has been a problem in LGBT rights and activism and scholarship is the focus on sexuality as opposed to the focus on love and romance and affection. Because, I could not have sex again for the rest of my life and I would still be super gay, right? It's not about what you like to do in bed, it's about who you fall in love with. So as you go through the readings this week, that's one thing to think about as well is how does this relate to love and romance?